glad to be back and do another show. Hopefully, you can
Yeah.
enlighten the world about all there is that you can do with the cloud. So, I guess,
What, 2 years now? You think we've enlightened someone? I hope. I hope it's.
you would think so. Yeah, just maybe all 10 of our fans. So today I know we have Shannon and Alan joining us to talk to us a bit about infrastructure as code and some patching and some cool things that they've done with their customers. And I have to ask, first of all, Alan, are you a Star Wars fan?
Yes, I am. I don't know how you possibly got that idea.
Yeah,
just by this one conversation.
Yeah, we Captain Obvious. So
yeah.
And Shannon, thank you for joining. And I know you do a little DJing there on the side, and evidence of that in the background as well. So
yes.
All right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've done with some of your customers?
Sure. Alan, do you want me to start? Do you want to start?
Yeah, you go ahead and start, and then I'll take the details.
Okay. So Alan had requested our team's expertise to come in and help him deliver an actual end-to-end sort of solution, and it was more of a pilot. What it turned out to be was this customer had a significant amount of VMs on-prem, and they were looking to patch those VMs. And so Alan kind of came up with some of the ways to kind of make this work and went through an initial kind of POC with them and got them buying into the fact that Azure could be used for a patch management solution.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the high level. Did Matt just sneeze?
I think he may have.
Go ahead.
So patching, whether it be in the cloud or on premises, that's always a challenge when you might be easy if you have 2 or 3 servers or machines, but it becomes certainly a challenge as the number of machines start applying like minions, and you have many of them to patch, varying operating system. Yeah. So what did you guys why don't we click down a bit into kind of what you guys did and how you solved some of that?
Sure, Alan. Do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead
share
and
my
share,
screen?
and I can. I'll speak to the how it all started, and then you can go into how it concluded. So our scenario was the customer already had some existing patch management software they were using to do their whole estate, about 12,000 servers. There was a mix of on-prem and AWS servers in that scenario. And so, but the existing software they had for doing this was just really expensive. Like the per node scenario was just a lot. It was a lot per server, when really all they were trying to do was some pretty basic Windows Linux patching. It was about a 60-40 split there. And they actually came to Microsoft initially to say, hey, we think we want to use SCCM for this. So System Center Configuration Manager can manage Windows and Linux workloads. But it was one of these things as we looked at on the Microsoft side, as we looked at it, we weren't sure that was going to really solve the problem they had in front of them. And so one of the big things they wanted to be able to do was to group servers and report on them in a smart way. So one of the challenges for this team was, as the kind of patching team, their job was to go out and make sure everything got patched. The problem is there were lots of groups within the organization that had control to not patch stuff. So like the guys running the domain controllers wouldn't patch their servers except when they really kind of wanted to. Or there were certain business applications that weren't getting patched. And so these guys were getting beat up by the CISO, quite frankly, for not having 100% compliance. Why not? And so there was a really big goal for them to be able to not only allow those groups that might have a different patch schedule to set that schedule, but also then display that so that everybody knew who was not compliant, and pressure could be put in the right places to make sure it got up. The other big thing is it needed to be centralized, and they had a pretty big spread between their AWS presence and on-prem presence. So they needed something with central control but distributed implementation. And so as we put this together, we had a bunch of sessions. We did talk about SCCM a bit just to say it could do it. But then as we went and showed them update management in Azure and what it could do, it became clear that was going to solve their reporting problems as well as be able to scale in a way that SCCM was going to take a lot of work. And so from there, I went and actually built out a POC environment. We did about 10 Linux servers, 10 Windows servers, and kind of walked them through all the various aspects of that.
So just to drive in a little bit, the update management is just a feature of Azure that allows you to schedule and manage and facilitate patching and updates without irregardless of where that machine is running.
Yeah, and I think that's the point there is I run into a lot of customers that are like, well, we don't do Azure. And what they're thinking is we don't do, infrastructure as a service virtual machines in Azure. We do that in AWS or GCP or wherever. Well, the really nice thing about update management is it's really more of a SaaS service. It's patching as a service. And so while you don't need a bunch of Azure infrastructure and networking and complexity on the Azure side to be able to do that, and this customer really didn't have any other Azure other than just that. So I think one of the misnomers here is you don't have to light up all of the Azure services and be using a bunch of stuff to take advantage of this service.
One of the things, SCCM is a very powerful tool, and I'm sure we'll get into more details here, but, was there any features or things that they compromised on to not do SCCM and go as a cloud native component?
So the one thing that they were compromising on was the ability to buy a third-party component to extend SCCM to do third-party patching. So if I've got a bunch of third-party apps installed on my systems that I want patched, there are third parties that will integrate with SCCM to make that work. Mm-hmm. It's not a native Microsoft tool, but they looked at the trade-off between, okay, I can get this thing in SCCM to do that, or I can get much better, more comprehensive Linux patching just at the OS level. And they really, the Linux sort of core patching was far more valuable to them than the side patching. And then even then for the side patching, Shannon came up with some pretty cool stuff for dealing with, third-party products. And so I'll let her talk about that later in the talk.
Okay, cool.
Shannon, you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Yeah, so and so the question really is you're thinking about, well, is this something I might want to do? What are the problems, right? So do you need to make sure are you having issues with reliability of your patching and maintenance windows and things like that? Then update management can help you with that, right? Do you want to be able to do some level of orchestration, like being able to pause reboots or send out notices that the patch has been applied, but I need to go do something manually before I move on. And then really just sort of grouping by workload, right? Like, can I make sure that this workload, I know what's going on with it and that that's being applied consistently? And then finally, really just one of the really cool things is the back-end engine of all of this is a log analytics workspace. And so you have all kinds of ability to, whether it's Windows or Linux, sort of use the same query language and the same capability to find out what happened in the process to track it down and figure it out. And I think that was one of the things that in the POC they really liked was, now I can kind of get this really detailed status either at a roll-up level where I've used all the details to make a nice dashboard, or at the line-by-line detail, I can pull that out. The other side of it was for them, they had a tough time tracking down all the things they needed to do to make their various Linux distributions work from a patching perspective. And since this was kind of all in there, it just worked. And in kind of a very cohesive and simple way rather than using different tools for different distributions. And then the other side of it was just really tracking down those things when it wasn't working, what was going on. So in all of these cases, the things listed on this slide, I think the big one was we solved problems they had that they didn't even bring to us initially. That as we did the POC and showed this, like, oh, well, that'll solve this other issue we have day to day. And they weren't really asking about some of these items.
Awesome.
Okay.
So the other big thing is from an onboarding experience, it's really about there's just a client. Okay, so if you're using Windows servers on-prem and you already have SCOM deployed, it's a switch in SCOM to turn this on. If you don't, it's a single client that you install on your endpoints to make it work. Same thing on Linux. And it doesn't matter whether they're domain joined, not domain joined. you basically it's one client to rule them all, and so that's something that people really like about it. And then there's other features beyond update management that you can choose to implement once you have that agent on there. So you can turn on Security Center or the advanced features of Security Center. You can turn on change tracking or inventory. And so there's a bunch of stuff that you get out of it if you choose to use it over and above updates that come with that. The other thing is, it's really one of these things. It doesn't matter where you're going, right? Because they had AWS and on-prem, but you could have Azure, you could have GCP, you could have stuff in Rackspace. It doesn't really matter. It's a nice integrated end-to-end picture, regardless of where those systems are, and it'll support pretty much anything out there that I've run into. I haven't found a customer yet, other than somebody stuck on some kind of ancient legacy Windows Server 2003 box out there that wasn't supported in some way.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great story where we go wherever the customer is, not the other way around.
Yeah. So Shannon, you want to talk about how it works?
Sure. So let's see if this works. Okay, great. So the update deployment gets scheduled inside the service. The hybrid runbook workers on-prem check for jobs. Now, when you onboard a VM into the solution, it's automatically a hybrid runbook worker by default. So it's consistently checking for any jobs that somebody may have scheduled, whether via script or whether manually.
We should maybe back up a little bit too. I know you and I know what hybrid runbook workers are, but in Azure Automation, you have the ability to run jobs in the cloud or to run them, and there's some limitations with that too. On first of all, connecting to on-prem resources, certainly be challenging when you have it running from the cloud, and also those scripts and jobs are time bound in terms of how long they can run.
Correct.
So an easy way to solve that is to put some simple software on a machine that you have in your infrastructure, whether it be a VM or on-prem, and that's what we refer to when we mean hybrid worker. It's part of Azure Automation that just can run stuff on a machine that you own.
Correct. Yeah, it's a simple way of onboarding it into Azure Automation. You're right. And this is part of the Azure Automation suite now. It used to be part of the OMS suite. Now that it's been separated, we're seeing some of these things fall in different areas, and update management falls underneath the Azure Automation side. So the hybrid runbook worker, so remember, all VMs that are onboarded into update management become a hybrid runbook worker, and they're talking to the update management service inside of Azure. They then talk to Windows Update, and then from there, we'll go out, grab what it needs. The communication comes back down, and those updates get installed. So it's a pretty straightforward process. And when you think about it, it's outbound communication. So there's no inbound communication. This was a nice big win for this customer. They had very rigorous security controls, and the fact that it was only outbound to Azure helped them out because the hybrid runbook worker would do what it needed to do in order to apply the patches.
Now, hey, Shannon, things that comes up with sometimes, and you kind of alluded to is, connectivity to the internet from servers is typically, highly frowned upon. What about the targets that they're talking to? Was that a part of a question or part of the problem that you had to solve was, narrowing down focus to the Microsoft Update WSUS services?
Good question. So we'll talk about the architecture a little bit later, but I'll give you the early, snippet, right? We use the OMS Gateway, and it's still called the OMS Gateway, which I think we should probably rename now since OMS is no longer a product. But it's called the OMS Gateway, and they did deploy it for this scenario because they didn't want their servers to go outbound to Azure. So really in this scenario, you have one extra piece. You've got the OMS Gateway. So the OMS Gateway is what's talking to Azure Update Management and acting as kind of that proxy between the service in the cloud and what's happening on-prem. So they did deploy that for each one of their regional areas that they were patching on-prem VMs.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
And then, the status itself will talk to the MMA agent. So that's that agent-based communication pattern that gets installed on every single VM, whether it be Linux or Windows. And then that's what will report its status to the update management service. That's when you'll understand where the compliance is for each one of your VMs.
So this is good. This addresses OS kernel and for Linux and Windows OS updates. But how does that work with packages or software components? I see
Yeah.
apt-get on this.
Right. So for for baseline OS patches, this service will handle a good chunk of what you're looking to do. I developed a handful of third-party patching Azure Automation runbook jobs that'll help related to some of the applications that may not fall in the Windows stack, may not fall in the Linux kind of OS level type stack. So things like WinZip, things like what else do we develop for 7-Zip? Things of that sort. We can lean on Azure Automation to have that Azure Automation runbook run on behalf of the VMs. Now, what we also found with this customer was that really all of the VMs that needed the third-party patching, they were Windows VMs. So the outside of the rollback, so that's another piece of this, right? So let's say you push a patch forward and it breaks a handful of VMs. We had to lean on the third-party Azure Automation runbooks to remove those patches. So that's not something that's enabled by default. It's in the, I guess, the pipeline or in the backlog. No timeline for having that feature be released. So what we did was we came up with the idea of this Azure Automation Runbook to remove those patches that may cause some friction. And so that I've got an Azure Automation Runbook for the Linux VMs, and then an Azure Automation Runbook for the Windows VMs, and then the other Azure Automation Runbooks that I developed were really for the Windows, applications that weren't going to be factored in by way of WSUS or Windows Update.
All right, Shannon. Well, that was a really cool overview of real world example. Taking something fairly complex like patching thousands of machines and simplifying it. That's what we do here.
That's what we do. Brian, why anything? That's why you guys are here.
That's right.
Well, thanks for.
Thank you very much, Shannon and Alan, for coming on. That was, like I said, it's really cool to kind of see some of the neat things that you guys, that some of our peers are doing and colleagues are doing with customers.
Sure. Thanks for having us.